All right, it is Sunday. It is the first day of our lesson here of Painting Your Muse for April. I'm just getting situated here. And I've got my underpainting pretty good. There's a few areas that I'm okay with, but for the most part, I'm pretty happy with where this is going and where this is. So where do I go from here? What's my roadmap? And in March's class, I kind of talked about my, where I want to go with this. So the first thing I want to do is I want to block in my, what I call negative space, which is the grass areas. So it helps me see, the story. Because right now it just looks like, burnt sienna all over. Yes, I have some different values, but I need to start putting the puzzle pieces in the areas to help me see. And then I'm going to start working the face and the bodice area. And then lastly, the leaves and the flowers. I always pick the things that give me the most stress and I leave those for the end. So today, what I wanted to do was have a discussion of blocking in the grass area, but also talk about color as it pertains to the grass area. Now, I'll do this with every section. So each section I'm going to break down into kind of manageable pieces here. So let's talk about the grass. And I want to talk about my palette here. And I'm just going to, not using my regular palette. I have my regular palette, but it is set for my skin tone and my body. But for the grass and the leaf and the flower area, I'm gonna use this palette here. This is my smaller. This is same glass palette, but this is a 9x12. And these are the colors that I've chosen so far for to block in the grass. I'm just focused on the grass. I'm actually missing a color, actually. So I need to get that that I want to add here. So let me get that while here we go. It's right here. So again, I'm going to be working in sections and I just want to, so I'm going to have separate palettes for each section. So I'm going to be using this palette for my leaves and my flowers and my grass. And then I have my main palette for my skin, hair, all that stuff. So this is what I'm using. And it's got a little burnt sienna on here. I left it on here because I might use it. It's still kind of wet. I don't want to waste it. But I've got some titanium white. I have some cad yellow medium here. I've got some yellow ochre. I have some cadmium red light, alizarin crimson, cerulean blue, ultramarine blue. What was this? Viridian. No, this is sap green. Sorry. This is viridian, and this is permanent green light. Now, let me just kind of explain the why. Why did I choose these colors? So, titanium white is kind of my neutralizer. It helps me lighten and gray out colors. I do like to mix different greens. So I have my cadmium yellow medium and my yellow ochre that I can mix with the blues here to make my own greens. I also have just greens out the tube to also help me mix different variations of greens. And then I have my reds here, which also warm up some of the greens and helps me with shadow and creating depth. So that's why I choose these colors. So literally, I think I have, except for the green, I have 2 of everything, 2 yellow, 2 reds, 2 blues. And I got 3 greens because I really like that green. I don't know if I'll use that permanent green light, but I just like it. So I'm just going to put it on there. So that's my palette. So let's go back and let's talk about the game plan for the grass. All right, so let's talk about the grass. Let's put everything else to the side and just focus on the grass area. There's a lot going on with this painting. There's a lot going on with the composition. And so that I don't feel overwhelmed by it, I'm going to break it down into sections. So I've got the background area, the negative space, which is the grass. I've got the body area, and then I've got the leaves and the flowers. So I'm going to break it down into sections. Now, in my previous video, I talked about color and how it influences, going to influence the different areas of the painting. But let's just focus on the grass. I went over my palette earlier, but what's going to influence, this is a grass area. Over here is a grass area. Over here is a grass area. And I think over here, and over there. So what are things that are influencing these little patches of grass? So we've got the sky, right? Because she's laying down on top of the grass. And so we've got the light source, which is the natural light, the sun, the sky, and whatever, right? So we've got the sky that is influencing the grass area. We also have the body here that is laying on top of the grass, which will be influencing the grass area. And then we also have the leaves and the flowers, which is also influencing the grass areas. So knowing that, how am I going to kind of translate what I want from these areas? The value, the temperature, and the chroma. So these are things that I'm thinking about. We talked about it in the last video. So for value, the value is going to be a little bit on the darker side. Why? Because it's in shadow. There's going to be a lot of areas in the grass areas that are in shadow, right? Because we have the body sitting on top of it, when we have the leaves and the flowers sitting on top of that as well. Another thing that's influencing is the temperature. We want to give the viewer the impression that the grass is set back behind the leaves and the flowers and behind the body shape, right? So we want it to sit and step back. We want it to be set back. We don't want it to move forward, and you don't want the viewer to think that the grass is up here at the same level as the hand. And then also chroma. I'm thinking about the entire painting and what I want to achieve from this color-wise. And I decided I want my painting to be a little bit more higher in chroma than a more muted, realistic tone, right? So I'm going to be using more vibrancy in the overall painting. So my grass areas are going to be a little bit more vibrant, but not too vibrant as to come forward, right? I don't want it to look, or I don't want it to seem like the grass is sitting on top of the person. I want it to make sure it's stepping back. So my roadmap, what am I going to be doing? I'm going to be thinking about shadow, because a lot of the grass will be in shadow. I'm going to think about temperature. I'm going to use cooler tones in my mixtures and my values, so that the viewer sees it as though it is sitting back rather than coming forward. And then I'm going to play around with warm and cool and add just bits and pieces of higher chroma, brightness, to give the impression of depth, right? Because not only is it sitting back, but there's going to be some blades of grass coming forward. Some of it's going to be back. So there's going to be some play with back and forth within the grass shape as well. So how do I get forward with that, right? There's a lot to think about. So instead of me getting overwhelmed, I'm just going to block in the grass shapes with a mid-tone. So I'm just going to I'll start with my sap green. And I'm going to add some of the cad yellow here. I'm going to make sure you see that there. And I'm going to go in, I'm going to mix it because I want it to be like a mid-tone. So I'm just playing around with color here. I use some of the sap green. I use some of the cad yellow medium. I'm adding some of the ultramarine blue. And I'll just kind of test it out there and see how. I'm going to add a little bit of the linseed oil. And I'm just going to test that out and just kind of see. That works. So right now I'm looking for a mid-tone. I want to stay on the cooler side. So what I did was to give it a little coolness, what I did was I added some of the ultramarine blue to my green mixture. And what the ultramarine blue does is it cools it down a bit. And it's going to be more of a mid-tone. So I don't want to be too light. I do want my green to be a little bit vibrant. So I don't want to gray it out a bit. So if I wanted to gray this mixture out, I might add a little bit of white to it to kind of lessen the chroma. So the white becomes the neutralizer. And it may, if I added white to this mixture here, it would, let me kind of do a mixture of, and I add a little white to it. It kind of turns almost a grayish blue color. And I'm going to bring this close to the camera here so you can see it. I don't know if the light is like horrible here, but and that would make it just slightly cooler. So to make it slightly cooler, you give it more of a bluish, add a little bit more of the blue into it, and the white becomes a neutralizer. The white kind of calms it down and grays it down a bit. And I'm just going to go ahead, I'm going to fill in the grass shape here. And I'm adding some of the linseed oil to kind of move it around a bit. And I'm just using a mid-tone. I'm not worried about, shadow, light. I'm not worried about the grass, the individual grass blades. And I'm just using just a mixture of the ultramarine blue, sap green, and some of this cad yellow medium. And I'll just start there. I have to start somewhere. So my mid-tone seems pretty dark, but I know that when I'm, sitting here thinking about, okay, what do I want? I want the value to be just a little bit darker since a lot of this will be in shadow. So I'm thinking more, the mid-tone would be a little bit more on the darker side of the scale. And I can always lighten it if I need to. And I'm just going in, using those colors here, just kind of deciding where I want these grass shapes to be. The linseed oil just kind of helps me spread out the paint. as well. And what this does is it's going to help me, I explained earlier, it's just going to help me see, it's going to help me see the composition a little bit better. It's going to help me get a good feel for where stuff is, and also get a good feel for my shapes, my other shapes, oops, too much blue. I added a lot of blue in there. Get me a feel for my arm shape, my body shape, the leaf shapes. I'm going to go all the way up there in the corner. Where else did we? I've got the arm here, so I've got, I think I had over here. Some grass here. I think all this here is going to be, I may have decided, I don't know if you can see in the corner, this little corner area here. And then I think I decided over here. So what I do is I just start out simple. You know, I'm just focusing on these areas here, starting out simple. More, let's see, we've got there. I think I'm going to add a little bit more grass here, over here. Just kind of step back and observe. So after I've kind of got a rough block in of my midtone, I step back and I observe to just see. I'm going to move this back a bit so you can see the entire, there we go, painting there. There we go. And I'll just step back and just kind of observe to see. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm gonna, just using that same, I'm gonna make this grass over here in the corner here. And I step back to just kind of take a look. Yeah, I think I'll do that whole section here. So what I'm looking at is I'm looking at my flower shape. Is it giving me, you know, is it giving me an interesting shape here? Because I need to take into account, right, that the area that the body is taking up. So I don't want to put grass over here because the body is over there. But I do want to create an interesting kind of shape with the flowers as well. And again, I can always, you know, readjust at some point, but I'm just trying to get a nice story going on here. So I like that. I'm happy with that. So now that I've gotten a mid-tone, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to mix a dark. So I just took some of the ultramarine blue. I took some of the alizarin crimson. And I'm going to take some more of the sap green here. Maybe some of the viridian. I want to make it a little bit more bluer. And I'm going to go in those areas very loosely where I think the shadow is going to be. So I mixed the alizarin crimson, the ultramarine blue. I did some of the sap green, but I like the viridian a little bit better because it's a little bit more bluer. And I'm just going to kind of roughly, just very roughly block in where I think those darker shadows are going to be. And this is where my messy palette comes in here. So there's definitely going to be some shadow. And again, right, what we want to give the viewer the impression that the grass is underneath. So there's going to be a lot of shadow. There's going to be a lot of influences, right? The leaves, the body that are creating shadow in these areas. And then in areas that are kind of out in the open, that don't have a kind of awning, so to speak, of the leaf or the flower or the body, light may find a way to reach that. So I'm just going to focus on the edges of the areas that may be in shadow more than others. And it just kind of helps me kind of see and create depth. I feel like the smaller areas will be a little bit darker. And you can start to see, and I can go back and you'll see what I'm going to do in a second. I'm just going to go in, like that's going to be really dark. I feel like, you know, up here, underneath this leaf here, the hair is going to create some shadow. I'm just roughly kind of blocking this in. I'm in kind of like a block-in phase. I feel like this up here is going to be a lot darker. Oops. I need to get more. Like so. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back in. Let me go back in. I'm going to light in. I'm going to add a little bit of the yellow, cadmium yellow, cadmium yellow medium. And I'm just going to kind of add back in some of the mid, just a bit. I'm running out of paint here. I'm going to use some of the yellow ochre. Let me get more of that yellow. Put it on my palette here. So I'm just going back in. Oh, I don't know how I got red in there. Going back in and reapplying the my mid-tone, just to kind of get a better transition from the shadow. So I'm playing with the dark, the shadow, and I'm just kind of going in really loosely and blocking in some of the mid. So now what you're seeing is you are seeing a little bit of shadow underneath, and you're starting to see some depth, right? Really rough, really loose right now. And I'm going to stick there for a second and get more of my Viridian. I got the sap green. Where's my Viridian? Here we go. So for the block in phase, you know, as I'm just blocking in color, I'm staying pretty loose. So I'm going in with just some of the Viridian. I'm going to add a little bit of the yellow ochre. The Viridian has a nice bluish kind of tone to it. And I'm just going in those areas close to those shadow areas. I'm just tapping in some of that Viridian. I'm not thinking about blades of grass right now. I'm not thinking about any type of detail. I'm just kind of setting the stage right now. I'm just setting the stage, establishing my shadow, stepping back. I'm going to get some more of the ultramarine blue on my palette here. I'm going to go in adding some of the ultramarine blue to those shadow areas. I'm just trying to build up those shadow areas. Just establish that shape. Very loose, nothing too detailed at this moment. I'm going to keep it very loose. And I'm just playing around with different values, different variations. Sticking with, I'm using the Viridian and more the ultramarine blue because it's a lot cooler. And then we will step back and observe. I'll let this sit for a bit, kind of take a photo of it to just see, okay, you know, are my shapes right? Are my grass shapes where I want them to be? And where else do I need to make adjustments? Okay, let me put this down for a second. Wipe my hand and step back and observe. So it's looking pretty good. I'm happy because what I've done right now is I have established my negative space, and my negative space is my grass, or my grass shapes. So where do I go from here? So I'll let this dry a bit, and then I'll start going and building up depth using some warm and cool tones, creating some texture by giving the impression of blades of grass, by adding texture and just kind of establishing shape. I don't have to get into minute detail right this second. Right now, I'm just kind of looking at shape. I want to establish the feel that this is below everything else. And I want the viewer to see that. So that's what my goal is right now. So I'm just going to let this dry, let it sit. I'll take a picture of it. And then tomorrow, or in the next lesson, I will let it I start kind of building up that depth using some warm and cool temperatures, you know, warm, cool, giving a little bit more vibrant in certain areas, and also using value as well.